From Lyoto Machida's victory that made absolutely no sense, to the UFC 167 decision that sent all the fans into a fit of rage, here are UFC's most controversial judging decisions ever, starting with a decision that confused all of us, including UFC President Dana White. Yep, I'm talking about Machida vs. Rua at UFC 104. Do you remember how everyone was practically losing their minds over Lyoto Machida before this crazy fight? I mean, the dude had just become the light heavyweight champ, and nobody could touch his karate game. Everyone thought he totally wiped the floor with Shogun Rua, this former Pride champ who got a shot at the title mainly because of his rep, and beating a washed-up Chuck Liddell, of course. But man, did Shogun surprise everyone or what? Instead of aiming for Machida's face, he went all in on his body and legs, like he'd cracked some secret code to victory. It was a sick fight, with both guys taking serious hits. Honestly, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. Anyway, most people thought Shogun won like 4 out of 5 rounds, but the judges, they went 48-47 for Machida. Even the crowd, who started out all about Lyoto, was ticked off. Soon enough, people started booing the player, chanting in support of Shogun. And get this, one of the judges tried to say, leg kicks don't win fights, even though 2 UFC fights in the last year got stopped by TKO because of leg kicks. Seriously? Talk about double standards. But thankfully, Dana decided to side with the fans, and they set up a rematch, where Shogun finally got his chance to shine, knocking Machida out in the first round and snagging the title that should have been his from the get-go. Wild, right? But this isn't the only time a decision puzzled fans. Let's flash forward to UFC on FX2, the night of the legendary Johnson vs. McCall fight. Did you know on that night in 2012, a judge's math mistake led to one of the most controversial decisions ever in the UFC's flyweight division? Yes, you heard that right. So, when the division was introduced, there were 2 fights to decide who would go for the inaugural title. Joseph Benavidez knocked out Yasuhiro Urushitani and won, while Demetrius Johnson and top-ranked Ian McCall had an insanely close match in the other. People thought McCall took round 1 and Johnson got round 2, but in round 3, McCall absolutely dominated. He should have had a 10-8 round, making it a 29-27 or 29-28 win, but 2 judges goofed up and scored it 29-28 for Johnson, giving him a split decision win. The plot thickens though. They later found out that there was a math error on the scorecards. Now, according to the flyweight tourney rules, they should have gone to an overtime round, which McCall would have had a big advantage in. But nope. They had a rematch 3 months later, and Johnson stepped up his game, securing a clear win. McCall's UFC career never really recovered, and it's wild to imagine how different the flyweight division could have turned out if the judges didn't mess up the calculation. I mean, come on. Even I'm not that bad at math. But if you thought that story was crazy, wait till you get a load of this one. Let me take you to UFC 119 and a crazy fight in the octagon. It's not very often that you see a fight where a guy almost finishes his opponent with both strikes and submissions, but still loses the decision. But that's exactly what happened back in September 2010, when Evan Dunham fought former UFC lightweight champ Sean Shirk. Dunham was on fire, coming in with 11 straight wins, 4 of them in the UFC. He almost got his 12th when he caught Shirk in a super tight guillotine choke in the first round. You guys, it was totally brutal. Commentator Mike Goldberg even started his famous "It is all over" line. But Shirk, turning purple, somehow escaped. Then the fighter decided to show no mercy and sliced Dunham open with an elbow, causing some serious blood flow. That elbow might have given Shirk the round, but the second and third were all Dunham. He nearly choked Shirk out twice more and almost KO'd him with a high kick in the third. Dunham should have had a 29-28 victory, but 2 judges gave it to Shirk instead. And when I tell you my jaw was on the floor, the decision pissed off the crowd big time. The cool part? The UFC seemed to know Dunham got robbed and treated him like a winner. He even got the main event slot against Melvin Gillard in his next fight. As for Shirk, he retired in 2013 after a bunch of injuries and never fought again. So he ended his career with a win he probably didn't deserve. Wild, huh? Man, 2010 was a big year for insane UFC decisions, because another one shocked fans in November. You guessed it, I'm talking about Lentz versus Griffin at UFC 118. Boy, was that one a doozy. So, after Nick Lentz had this super boring win over Andre Winner, fans were annoyed to say the least. Rumor had it that UFC would set him up with a crazy tough opponent. And they did. They matched him with top-ranked Tyson Griffin. Now, Griffin had lost his last 2 fights, so he was ready to bounce back. And honestly, most people watching thought he totally did. Lentz got some takedowns, but Griffin pulled off even more, plus some insane slams early on. He also crushed the striking game and knocked Lentz down twice in the 3rd round. Pretty much everyone scored at 30, 27 for Griffin, and no other score seemed legit. But guess what? While one judge nailed it with a 30, 27 for Griffin, the other 2 somehow went 29, 28 for Lentz, so he ended up with the win, even though he didn't really earn it. This bad call mostly flew under the radar, since it was just a prelim opener in the days before all fights were televised. But if you stumble upon this fight on UFC Fight Pass, you'll still be scratching your head at how those judges saw things. It's just one of those decisions that makes 0 sense, no matter how you slice it. And while we're on the topic, let me tell you about another fight that you might have forgotten about. But it irks me to this day. Woodley versus Shields was quite something, folks. Tyron Woodley has got a bit of a reputation as a boring fighter in the UFC world, but this time, it really wasn't his fault. He had this split decision loss to Jake Shields, and it's still one of the worst robberies in UFC history. Woodley was fresh off his UFC debut, KOing Jay Heron, and everyone thought he could beat Shields, thanks to stronger wrestling and a way better stand-up game. Shields had trouble with guys he couldn't take down, and Woodley was just that type. So Shields never managed to take Woodley down. And even though he got some clinch control and landed a few strikes, he also got dropped by a heavy leg kick in the 1st round and stunned by a spinning back fist in the 3rd. Sure, Woodley wasn't a high-volume striker, but when he landed, he hit harder than Shields. With all the clinching being equal, Woodley should have won 30, 27. But nope, 2 judges went 29, 28 for Shields, tipping the scales in his favor, while the other went 30, 27 for Woodley. It was a total ripoff for Woodley, who should have had his first win over a top-ranked welterweight contender. The fight's been mostly forgotten because it was pretty dull, but man, what a baffling decision. I'll leave you with a final controversial UFC decision, one that even left the president scratching her head. No one will ever forget UFC 167, the night of St. Pierre versus Hendricks. When GSP went into his 9th title defense against Johnny Hendricks at this fight, there were already rumors about his possible retirement. But things got even crazier after the fight, when GSP won by a split decision, leaving fans and critics thinking it should have gone the other way. Hendricks had a rocky start, almost getting caught in GSP's guillotine choke, but he bounced back, winning the 1st and 2nd rounds with powerful strikes and takedown defense. St. Pierre managed to win the 3rd and 5th rounds, but that 4th round was brutal for him, with Hendricks dominating on the ground. Everyone thought it'd be a 48-47 win for Hendricks, but 2 judges went the other way, and GSP retained his title before taking a break from the sport. This decision ticked off not only the fans, but also Dana White, who wanted St. Pierre to give Hendricks a rematch. Trust me, White was pretty furious about the whole thing, but the rematch never ended up happening. And unfortunately for Hendricks, he couldn't keep up that level of performance. He won the vacant title 5 months later, but failed to defend it and ended up losing 6 of his next 8 fights. It's sad to see what happened to this fighter. I know you win some, you lose some, but he didn't even get the win he deserved. Well, there you have it. From the UFC 167 decision that pissed all the fans off to Lyoto Machida's victory that made absolutely no sense, those were UFC's most controversial judging decisions ever.